Hello. In this week's Torah portion, Terumah, we are commanded to build a temple in which to worship gods. Ve'asu li mikdash ve'shahanti betocham, and let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst. Unquote. We tried twice to build a temple in Jerusalem, but the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonian in 587 BCE, and the second temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE. We mourn their destruction every year on Tisha B'Av. For 2,000 years we have prayed for the rebuilding of the temple, the Beit HaMikdash. This was not possible because the site was controlled by the Romans, then the Byzantines, then the Persians, then the Arabs, then the Seljuks, then the Crusaders, then the Mongols, then the Mamelukes, then the Turks, then the British, and then the Jordanians. But Jews control the site today, since June 7th, 1967, for the first time since biblical days. Although most nations feel they should have a say in what happens to Jerusalem, the decision to rebuild belongs to the state of Israel. In fact, a group called the Temple Mount Faithful routinely tries to set up a foundation stone for the third temple on Tisha B'Av, and the Israeli police routinely stop them. So should Israel build the third temple? The arguments for it are as follows. First, more and more Jews want it. Recent surveys show that between 1 and 2/3 of Israeli Jews want it, some for religious reasons and some for nationalistic reasons. These numbers would have seemed unthinkable only a generation ago. We long for the temple every day in traditional Jewish prayers. It's our historical right, and it would be a focal point, a rallying point for world Jewry. On the other hand, there are arguments against it. Many Jews don't want to go back to sacrificial worship. Also, Jewish law says that it can only be on Temple Mount in Jerusalem, close to the Western Wall. But that site is occupied by the Islamic Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam. And Islamists would wage holy war if we try to displace their shrine. Let's begin by reviewing the function, the history, and the halacha of the temple. First, the function. In the deserts, right after the exodus from Egypt, we built a tabernacle, or Mishkan, containing the Ark of the Covenant, where the tablets of the law were kept. Then we built a permanent structure in Jerusalem at Temple Mount, the location of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. By tradition, it cannot be built elsewhere. The Ark of the Covenant was kept in the Holy of Holies, Kodesh HaKodashim, which only the high priest could enter, and only on Yom Kippur. The Ark was lost in the destruction of the first temple, and so it was unavailable for the second temple. Some believe it is hidden in a secret chamber under Temple Mount. The priests of Kohanim offered the sacrifices mandated by the Torah only in the temple. There were 3 daily offerings, tamid, plus special ones on Shabbat and the holidays. Examples: the burnt offering, or olah, the original Holocaust, which is completely burned to ashes; the peace offering, shlamim, eaten mostly by the persons offering it, but also by the Kohanim; the meal offering, or mincha, partly burned and partly eaten by the Kohanim; the sin offering, hatat; the guilt offering, asham; the free will offerings, nedava; the thanksgiving offerings, todah; the vow offerings, nedarim, and others. Naturally, all the laws of kosher slaughter applied. The Levites sang psalms with musical instruments during the offerings. Examples are the Psalm of the Day, the Psalms for the new months, the Hallel during major holidays, and Psalms for special sacrifices. The 3 daily offerings included prayers. These prayers are now the 3 daily prayers, Shacharit, Mincha, and Ma'ariv, and replace the sacrifices. The part of Shacharit surrounding the Shema is essentially unchanged today. The Amidah replaces the daily offering. The Musaf replaces the additional offerings. The prayers for rebuilding the temple are extensive in traditional services, but deleted in non-traditional services. For example, the 17th blessing of the Amidah, the Avodah, reads, quote, רצה השם אלוקינו בעמך ישראל ובתפילתם והשב את העבודה לדביר ביתך. ואישי ישראל ותפילתם באהבה תקבל ברצון ותהי לרצון תמיד עבודת ישראל עמך. Be favorable, O Lord our God, towards your people Israel, and towards their prayer, and restore the service to the Holy of Holies of your temple. Accept the fire offerings and the prayer of Israel with love, and may the service of your people Israel always be to your favor. Ishei Israel, the fires of Israel, refers to sacrifices, of course, but the Talmud also uses that expression to refer to the righteous of Israel. So Rabbi Soloveitchik reinterprets that line to refer to our martyrs, the human self-sacrifices we have been forced to make in history, lekiddush Hashem. Another prayer reads, Leshana haba'ah b'Yerushalayim habnuya, next year in Jerusalem rebuilt. The word rebuilt refers to the temple. Also, Jews have a custom of facing the location of the temple during prayer anywhere in the world. Now let us briefly retrace the history of the temple. The first temple was built in 957 BCE by King Solomon. It became the only allowed place of Jewish sacrifice, replacing the tabernacle, the portable sanctuary built by Moses in the Sinai desert, as well as local sanctuaries and altars in the hills. 30 years later, Sheshonq I, the Pharaoh of Egypt, attacked Judah while Rehoboam, Solomon's son and successor, was king. He sacked the temple and looted its treasures. Some partial reconstruction was carried out, but serious rebuilding was initiated only in 835 BCE, 122 years later, by King Jehoash of Judah. There were some lapses into idolatry at the temple at that time. The temple was stripped again by Sennacherib, king of Assyria, about 700 BCE, 135 years later. It was finally completely destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BCE, 114 years later. It lasted 401 years. The second temple was authorized by Persian King Cyrus the Great. Construction began in 538 BCE, 48 years after the destruction of the first temple, and completed 23 years later. It was less imposing than its predecessor, and narrowly avoided destruction in 332 BCE by Alexander, the so-called Great, of Macedonia. The kingdom of Judah chose to surrender rather than fight. The Greeks tried to stamp out Judaism. Antiochus III introduced Greek gods into the temple in 198 BCE. The Jews rebelled and were crushed. Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, built a statue of Zeus in the temple, and Greek priests began to sacrifice pigs there. The Jews rebelled again. A Greek official asked a Jewish priest, Mattathias, to perform a Greek sacrifice. Mattathias killed him. The Jews rose up behind Mattathias and his 5 sons, known as the Maccabees, in 167 BCE. They won and rededicated the temple in 165 BCE. This event is commemorated every year on the festival of Hanukkah. In 63 BCE, the Roman leader Pompey entered the Holy of Holies and desecrated it. In 54 BCE, the Roman leader Crassus looted the temple treasury. The Jews revolted again and were put down again in 43 BCE. In 20 BCE, King Herod began to renovate the temple. It was finished 80 years later, in 60 CE, although worship continued during construction. In 70 CE, only 10 years later, the Romans destroyed it. It lasted 608 years. Emperor Constantine made Christianity the only allowed religion in the Roman Empire. But his successor, Julian, called the Apostates, reversed the decree and allowed all religions to flourish. In 363, he ordered the temple rebuilt at his own expense. After a good start, there was a big fire, perhaps intentional or perhaps accidental, and an earthquake in Galilee. Julian was killed in a war in Persia after a 2-year reign, and his successor, Jovian, who lasted only 8 months, re-established Christianity as the sole religion. The temple was not rebuilt. The last great Sanhedrin was forced to fold in 358 CE. In 691, the Muslims built an Islamic shrine at the site, considering it to be where Muhammad ascended to heaven. Now let's move on to modern times. In 1967, Israel liberated Temple Mount during the Six-Day War. In 1980, it unified Jerusalem, putting Temple Mount in Israel proper. Muslims were given administrative control through the Jordanian Waqf. The Waqf allows tourists to visit, but not worship or engage in archaeological digs. Jews may pray at the Western Wall, which is the only remaining part of the Second Temple, but not elsewhere on the site. More and more Jews try to pray on Temple Mounts, but Israel enforces the ban on Jewish worship there. Take, for example, this new item. Jerusalem, JTA, June 19, 2013 at 11:18 a.m. 4 Jews detained at Temple Mounts accused of bowing in prayer. 4 Jewish Israelis were detained by police during a visit to the Temple Mount for praying at the site. The 4, identified as teenagers, were arrested Wednesday and taken for questioning. Police told the Times of Israel that the 4 prostrated themselves on the mount. Yet, in 1967, the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, passed a law guaranteeing freedom of access and worship in all holy sites. Evidently, all did not include the Mount. Islamic preachers regularly deliver inflammatory speeches on the Mount to encourage Arab hatred of Jews. Interestingly, Israeli rabbis have sided with the Muslims and upheld the ban, but for different reasons. Jews may not walk on the Temple Mount in a state of ritual impurity because of the risk of desecrating the Holy of Holies. A ban on Jewish entry is posted at the gate by the Chief Rabbinate of Israel. It reads, quote, "Entrance to the area of the Temple Mount is forbidden to everyone by Jewish law owing to the sacredness of the place. Signed, the Chief Rabbinate of Israel." Unquote. The rabbis also mandated that there should be no Jewish exploration or excavation or prayer on Temple Mounts. Jews are even forbidden to fly over it. The ban will stay in effect until the Messiah comes. Some rabbis disagree on the ground that you can't rebuild the temple unless you walk on the site. So unclean persons should be allowed to go there, but solely for the purpose of rebuilding the temple. Other rabbis say that only the Messiah can rebuild the temple, or declare the state of Israel for that matter. Israel's High Court of Justice has upheld the ban. A hardcore of Israelis continually try to start the rebuilding. 2 yeshivot near the Western Wall teach temple rituals to some 200 students. Generally, the only non-Jews who support rebuilding the temple are evangelical Christians. Let us now turn to the Halacha, or Jewish law, regarding the rebuilding of the temple. As we saw, it's a commandment in the Torah. The Rambam's commandment number 20 of 613 is, build and maintain a temple in Jerusalem. Out of 613 commandments in the Torah, 202, or about a third, require the temple to be standing to be fulfilled. The Talmud says, the third holy temple will be rebuilt before the establishment of the kingdom of David. Unquote. Some rabbis interpret this as meaning that the temple will be rebuilt only when the Messiah comes. Maimonides agrees in his Halachic writings. Quote, the Messiah will build the holy temple and gather the dispersed of Israel. All the laws of the Torah will be reinstated as before, the sacrifices will be offered, the sabbatical year and the Jubilee instituted as outlined in the Torah. Unquote. But Maimonides seems to disagree in his non-Halachic writings. Quote, those who convince themselves that they cannot perform all commandments until the Messiah arrives, and then they will all go to Jerusalem, are not only fooling themselves, but are causing others to sin as well, because there is no fixed time set for the Messiah to arrive. The obligation of the commandments is not dependent on the arrival of the Messiah. Rather, it is our duty to be occupied with Torah and commandments, doing our best to fulfill them. After we have seen to our obligations, if God finds it worthy to see the Messiah, well and good. But if not, we have lost nothing and we have fulfilled our obligation. Unquote. In his Guide for the Perplexed, Maimonides also seems to downplay sacrifices. Quotes, the custom in those days among all men consisted in sacrificing animals. God did not command us to give up these services, for this would have been contrary to the nature of man, who generally cleaves to that to which he is used. Sacrifices, however, are not the primary object of the commandments about sacrifices. Prayers are. To wit, we were not commanded to sacrifice in every place and in every time, or to build a temple in every place, or to allow anybody to become a priest and sacrifice. Only one temple has been appointed, and only, as the Torah says, quote, in the place where the Lord shall choose, unquote. In no other place are we allowed to sacrifice. The Torah says, be careful not to give your burnt offerings in every place that you see. And only the members of a particular family were allowed to officiate as priests. All these restrictions serve to limit this kind of worship. But prayer and supplication can be offered everywhere and by every person. Because of this, the prophets rebuke people for being overzealous in bringing sacrifices. Unquote. The Midrash says that in the Messianic age, all sacrifices will be discontinued except for the Thanksgiving offering. Time to conclude with a few final thoughts. First, if enough Jews want it, the temple will be rebuilt. Recent surveys, as I mentioned, show that between 1 and 2/3 of Israeli Jews want it. Im tirtzu en zo agada. If you will it, it is no dream. Yes, it will incite violent reactions, but they said the same thing about the founding of the State of Israel, and there was war, and Israel prevails. However, pikuach nefesh, the saving of lives, takes priority over most commandments. Should we rebuild the temple if it means that large numbers of people will die as a result? Unclear. Second, the temple could serve a universal function, emphasizing prayer for all. The prophet Isaiah said, Ki v'tzi bet tefillah yikare lechol ha'amim. For my house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples. Indeed, in temple days, Gentiles also could offer sacrifices there. In fact, the practice was very popular. Third, the temple will not necessarily include sacrifices, at least not at first, and if it does, not all may choose to partake. Also, it could be near but not at the old location, perhaps on the other side of the western wall. In fact, the exact location of the temple is uncertain. Some scholars say it's where the Dome of the Rock is. Some say it's a little to the north of it, others a little to the east of it. Fourth, are we ready to avoid the conditions that caused the destruction of the first two temples? The Talmud says, quote, why was the first temple destroyed? Because the three cardinal sins of Judaism were rampant in society: idolatry, sexual immorality, and murder. But why then was the second temple destroyed, given that at that time the people were involved in Torah commandments and acts of kindness? Because senseless hatred, sinat chinam, prevails. This teaches that senseless hatred is as serious as the three cardinal sins. Unquote. So we need to be both observant and nice to one another to deserve the temple. One tradition championed by Hasidic Rabbi Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev is that the third temple has already been built in heaven and will descend on earth fully assembled once we prove ourselves worthy. It will mysteriously fit every Jew's unique personal spiritual needs according to his own relationship with God. Quote, the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av is called Shabbat Hazon, the Shabbat of the vision, because on this Shabbat, once and only once every year, God grants every Jew a vision of the third temple. If you haven't seen it, your soul saw it. Unquote. Finally, in the Midrash, God tells the prophet Ezekiel, learning in the Torah about the description of my house is as great as building it. Go and tell the Jewish people to occupy themselves in learning about the temple, and in that merit I will consider it as if they are actually involved in building it. Unquote. Shabbat Shalom.